Welcome to the Offworld Podcast, your gateway to the cosmos beyond our Earth. We will explore our familiar celestial neighbours and venture into the vast, uncharted territories of our solar system, to the Moon, Mars, Venus, and beyond.
Coming up on today's show.
I think it is such an exciting time to be in space right now. Like
Yes.
there is a fair bit of money going into, certain avenues, but like things like space law, like if you try to clarify what is allowed in space and you help establish space law either internationally or for your own nation, like you could be changing the way that we do things in the heavens for hundreds of years to come. Like it's a very important time to be figuring out the rules of the road for space.
Welcome to episode 6 of Going Offworld. I'm your host, Steve Fisher. Today, we're taking a critical and often humorous look at the challenges of settling Mars with Kelly and Zach Wienersmith, authors of A City on Mars and the New York Times bestseller, Soonish. From Kelly's background as a parasitologist, studying how organisms can affect behavior, to Zach's work as the creator of Saturday morning breakfast cereal comics, they bring a unique perspective to examining the realities of establishing human settlements beyond Earth. Through their extensive research, they challenge many common assumptions about space colonization, while highlighting crucial questions we need to answer before attempting to live on Mars. So whether you're curious about the biological challenges of having babies in space, the complexities of creating closed-loop ecosystems, or what we should include on humanity's next message to the stars, you will not want to miss this fascinating and thought-provoking conversation. Join us on this journey, where the sky is not the limit, and the stars are just the beginning. Kelly, Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, I know you from your amazing book about Mars, which we'll get into shortly. But for those who don't know you, when you each kind of give your respective journeys and where we are today. So, Kelly, you want to go first?
Sure. So my journey doesn't really involve space at all until the last couple years. So I'm an ecologist who studies how parasites change the behavior of their hosts. So I studied a brain-infecting parasite of fish and looked at how it changed the fish's behavior. But I'm like afraid of getting bored. And so anytime there's a new project, no matter how far outside of my expertise, I'm like, yes, I'm in. And so Zach and I had the opportunity to write a book about emerging technologies, and that sounded great. So we did it, and it turns out we really enjoy writing books together. And so then we decided space settlements were probably coming soon based on all of the hype and all the pop sci articles that we were reading and all the like space settlement advocates, we were talking to. And so we decided we'd write a book about that. And that's not the book we ended up writing. We ended up writing about why it's probably not coming super soon. But yeah, that's my sort of tortuous journey to right now.
And what about you, Zach?
I mean, I was on that same trip. I think we had roughly the same change of feeling about it about the same time. So I don't have too much of a different story.
But what else have you done with your life?
Yes.
Oh, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah. Let's have some deep, Zach, let's have some deep conversations. Like, so what have you done? What have you done with your life?
What have I done? Man, I'm trying to do less. Well, I'm a cartoonist, and we kind of slipped into pop sci by accident because having a comic strip people read led to the opportunity to write books, and I think after our last one, we did a book called Soonish, and it did reasonably well, and so we got to write another one. But we wanted to do something a little bit more in depth, or I should say, a lot more in depth. And it ended up being a lot more depth than we had imagined.
I would say reasonably well, being a New York Times bestseller. That's that's reasonably well. We
were happy. Yeah.
I would be as well as as a fellow author. So you also created Saturday morning breakfast cereal. So what is that? So for the audience, like what is that?
It's a comic strip. It's like a daily joke comic strip about a lot of different things. It's like been around for 20 years now. So I think it's like an old internet comic that has shambled forward into the modern era. I don't know. It's about science and philosophy and dirty jokes and kind of a little of everything.
Where did the inspiration come from to do it? Like, where did it kind of start?
I guess it started that I had like a day job I hated, and I was like, I don't know, I don't know what to do. And I And on like early internet, it became clear that you could make very early internet, there was no money, and then at some point there was a small amount of money. But when you're like 22, a small amount of money is enough to eat and survive. And so that seemed more appealing than having a real job. And then by luck and some amount of work, it ended up being a career.
So when you're sitting around having coffee and you say, space colonization, let's write a book about that. Like, did you have connections in the space industry? Were you always like kind of, as I like to say, space junkies, like interested in space? Like, where did, like, is it just analysis of the market? You saw like a lot of art. Like, where did that all kind of? Because let's go back. Let's talk about Soonish. Where did Soonish come from? Like from the conversations and the kind of, we'll call it the opportunity analysis, as we like in entrepreneur. You see that opportunity. Where did Soonish kind of come from?
So Zach and I both try to pick projects based on like what do we want to be spending the next couple years of our lives learning about. And so at the time, we thought it would be fun to spend a few years learning about emerging technologies and thinking about what still remains to be accomplished to make those technologies part of our lives. And so basically, that sounded like fun. And so there was no like business analysis. We were like, that sounds neat. And so there were two chapters that were related to space. One of them was cheap access to space. And that chapter was hard to write because we had some stuff in there like space elevators, which are still a really long way off. But then we were also writing about how, like, hey, coming soon, we'll have these reusable rockets, which will drop the cost of sending mass to space. And while we were writing it, we had to keep updating the chapter because SpaceX just kept doing amazing things. And by the time that chapter, hit the shelves a year after we submitted the manuscript to our publisher, it was already way out of date because SpaceX was just like doing such a great job. And the other chapter was about asteroid mining. And so we interviewed a guy from Deep Space Industries and we talked to some other folks who were excited about asteroid mining. And they convinced us that law was changing to make asteroid mining more feasible, that money was just being like absolutely plowed into this field. And that like technology was moving along fast enough that this is something that could be feasible in the not too distant future. And at the same time, we were talking to space advocates who were saying, like, these are the pieces we've been needing to have settlements. Like, we know how to live in space. The thing that's been holding us back is that it's really expensive. But now we can ship habitats from Earth to space because we're going to have this way to get mass to space cheaply with SpaceX rockets. And if we don't want to send everything from Earth, we're going to have asteroid mining. And so we'll be able to build stuff like habitats using resources that are already available in space. And so between those various pieces of information, we felt like we knew enough people that we could start writing this book. But there were a lot of people we still needed to meet along the way. And it turned out there was a lot of additional research, and that maybe we had selectively met the people who were excited about space settlements and were maybe overselling them a little bit. And so, yeah, that's how that played out.
Excellent. So I was thinking, like, in the book, you kind of said that like space elevators are far away. What do you think's are going to arrive soonish? Like, what's in the scale of things? Because, well, let me preface this, because I think when I saw the book and I read through some of it and I went through parts of it, it reminded me of, there's a book, and I want to say The Physics of Star Trek. It was a book, I think Michio Kaku wrote it. It was about Star Trek. It was like all the technologies in Star Trek, like how far things were away or what was just completely out of there. The thing about Star Trek is it's an abundance society, right? He said the things that most of these things will kind of get there, but the thing that's probably the amount of energy required is like the replicator to like, materially transfer. But you also talked about programmable matter inside of the book as well. So yeah, what do you think like is in that kind of scale of like next 10 years, 20 years versus like, oh, we got 100, it's 100, like it's way still soon, but not too close. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't like to make numerical predictions. It's a very good way to embarrass yourself.
You should tell
I'd
that
say,
to everybody that writes predictions, because in about a month we're going to be blanketed with. Yeah, this is what I don't. So futurists do not predict the future. I almost say this on every podcast. We look at possible futures. There's the probable, there's the the preferred, right? But they're all kind of possible, and it's on it like the predictions are more like bets, like on technology or things that might happen. They're not. So yeah, so like yes, you don't have to put the debt, but how about just on the range of like don't put years on it, but like soonish versus soon far away.
Yeah. So the way I tend to think about this sort of stuff is like, if anything is already on an exponential learning curve, it's relatively easy to predict the future. The question is, could you go through our like list of technologies and say which are on that? So if you look at reusable rockets, rocketry generally, it's very clearly on a nice exponential learning curve. The price is going down at a fairly predictable rate. The amount of freight is going up, so you should expect that to just keep getting better. With the one caveat that there's really only one major player right now. SpaceX is like over, people can talk abstractly about the change in the space market, but it's really all down to SpaceX. There are a couple other players. Maybe that'll change in the next few years. But anyway, so you can look at. I actually think fusion is similar. If you look at what's called the triple product or the Lawson criterion, which is a measure of essentially how good you're doing fusion, that's been on a nice exponential curve over time, and there's some cool projects going on right now that are unlike 10 years ago, well funded and run by non-cranks, such as Commonwealth Fusion. Some people think Helion Energy. There's also, of course, ITER in Europe. So I would say fusion, at least getting to like ignition, seems like it'll happen fairly soon. Whether or not it's economically viable is a different question, and we don't know yet. Most of the rest of the stuff we talk. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, most of the rest of the stuff we talk about are pretty skeptical. So, like, just to give a few examples, like we talk about, could you have robotic construction of buildings? And it's possible, and AI is moving fast now, and maybe nobody knows. But this keeps getting tried, and it's just humans are really good at like manual tasks that require you to like assess things like how viscous is something, how hard is something. So like we talked, for example, about mortar. Mortar is actually a very sophisticated process because mortar changes its consistency over the course of the day, and you have to do this complicated move with your hand to kind of like slop it in place. If AI really turns out to be like on the upper limit of what we're hoping it does in the next 10 years, who knows, maybe. But then other stuff like programmable matter is like really cool. Right now I have like trouble visualizing the path forward, like to get on a nice learning curve. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of like short-term viability for product, which I feel like is really important to trying to imagine the future. And like asteroid mining, I'd say pretty questionable. We were fairly skeptical in the book that it was like economically viable. It was like cool if you're already doing something in space, but pretty skeptical that it's like a good economic move versus like digging a really big hole on Earth, which will probably be cheaper forever. I'm being like a downer. I'm mostly positive on fusion. The rest I'm pretty skeptical of.
Well, it's funny when you talk. I was earlier going to talk about fusion. So I'm a big proponent of fusion, and even like current nuclear fission technology, because the reactor, everyone thinks about 3 Mile Island, they think about Chernobyl. Like these are reactors and technology from like the 60s and 70s. Like this is like the stuff now. There was a documentary with Bill Gates that they talked about. I think I forget who he worked, his partner from Microsoft. These things are small, and the waste is minimal, and it's very safe. Like you could really regionalize like nuclear power. Like, and I know they're doing it in China because their coal is they need to offset their energy. And I haven't bought an electric car purely out of principle yet, because the fact that you're doing that, you're still burning coal at the end state, right? We need a full stack energy solution, and I believe you're right. I think you're going to see more. I think you're going to see a lot safer. Microsoft actually bought 3 Mile Island, I think, and they're going to use it. So I think they're going to overhaul it with the newer reactor technology and kind of prove, like, I think that's a big case for them. But their ability to do AI using that tech with nuclear, that's awesome, right? So then it changes the acceleration curve of fusion, of actual like how do we get it commercially viable by the mid 2030s, 2040s, and kind of start a fusion era that takes it. So I agree. I mean, you can't put years on it. I try and at least have to put like kind of windows when we look at trends and the signals and tech, like people like you said, the non-cranks that are doing it. So we'll talk about Mars in a second, but for those on the podcast listening, we both share something very cool in common. We both have spouses. Like my wife and I wrote a book, and we have another one coming. Like we've written a book together, and it's quite an experience. So how this is, as someone you can ask this, but also to have lived it, writing a book with your spouse, your significant other, what was it like for both of you? Like, what was that, let's do this together. Are you out of your, was anyone like, you out of your mind? Or like, are we gonna kill each other? Like how did you and you find a flow? So yeah, tell me about both of you, like, what was your experience doing this?
So we've worked together on other projects before we wrote a book. So we organized a live event called BAFest, the Festival of Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses. And organizing a live event.
Wait, go back. So if explain that one. That one's people's gonna fly by, and even in the transcript subtext, when there are people like, what is that? So let's go with that.
So the idea is you come up with a theory that is quite clearly wrong, but you try to support it with data anyway. And so I think one of my favorites is a guy named Michael Anderson was arguing that as men get older, their waistlines expand because in the past there were lots of floods, and this would help them float and keep their families safe. And so he went through and he found a bunch of historical data for like there used to be regular floods and like how
this
much
is like
more
a 10-minute
buoyant
talk.
are
This
you?
is like a whole,
Wow.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. And so a bunch of people submit proposals, and then we pick the proposals that we think are the most convincing and hilarious. And we've got a panel of judges who listen to the 6 proposals, and then they ask questions, and they ask questions as though they're seriously asking the question. Like, would you expect men with broader waistlines to have advantages with global climate change bearing down on us? Will there be more floods, and will we see those men being more successful or something? And then you have to like seriously answer that question. And then at the end you get a trophy of Hennig Brand. He was a chemist who boiled his own urine and accidentally discovered phosphorus. And so we 3D printed a trophy of that moment based on a famous painting. And so anyway, we did this live event in Boston, London, San Francisco, Houston. We did it in a bunch of different cities. And organizing a live event is a lot of work. And so
yes.
we're pretty good at working together. We also used to have a podcast together called The Weekly Wienersmith. And so we're we like having projects together. And then when we got this opportunity to write a book together, we were like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And it was different than organizing a live event. And we had there were some tense moments. What our biggest debate was I really like Microsoft Word and Zach prefers Google Docs. And that got heated.
I totally understand that. Yes. I love Scrivener, but you can't share it. You can't collaborate on it. It's definitely for the single author. It's a wonderful tool, right? But to your point, like how do you, we found detente with Word because that was the way to comment and work with our editor. That's like really, it's funny. Like people think, why would you like just use this tool? Like when you're both together and you have varying degrees of opinions, it's the simple things and how you have a creative collaborative workflow, right? It's like that is tantamount to just getting, because you have to focus on the content. Like how did you split the content? Because I know Zach, you're an illustrator, so Kelly and Zach, how did you both, and I'll share our perspective. I want to hear yours. Like, how did you say, like, how did you divide and conquer, break the book up? How did you do that so that the flow kind of started to come?
You want to take this one, Zach?
Sure. Yeah. We So this book was this is like an extraordinary research load. I would say, there's not a lot of like popular science that has this much depth of research, and that was really hard. And so we ended up having to do more division of labor to essentially play to each other's strengths and talents. So at first we were kind of just doing whatever, and then maybe like a year or two in, we decided it had to be broken down more carefully. And so, you know, we both did everything, but loosely speaking, it was kind of like we both would do research, but I tend to do I generally did a lot more like reading everywhere, more light content. Like, so I was the one reading, 800 astronaut memoirs and like these weird old like future casting books about space from the past, and but also like technical stuff. But then for like the real drill down, Kelly was reading like NASA documentation and that kind of stuff. And then we had like a big Google Drive full of documents on different topics that we would both fill out with notes on everything we read. And then Kelly would go through, so there was a chapter on psychology. Kelly's job was to like go through, I think psychology in particular was literally like 1,000 pages of notes and condense it into a short, much shorter draft that was kind of like a first proposal for how this chapter might go. And then my job was to take that document and convert it into something a little more light and fluffy for a general audience. And then the sort of humor and comic stuff, that was like the very last thing that was done. That was me going through and just putting a little sprinkle on top, and then Kelly would say whether it sucked or not, and then we would kind of fuss a little over the language. And then at that point, it was off to some experts to make sure we didn't tell any whoppers, which usually we didn't. And then I think at that point there would be like a last pass, and that was it. But yeah, it was a much more layered approach than we did. Like for Soonish, we essentially just divide and conquer. Like, you do this chapter, I'll do that chapter. Whereas this, like that wouldn't have worked because it was too much work. We had to play to like talent and interest.
Well, and then there was the very last stage where I went through literally every single line of the book and was like, what is our citation for that? What is our citation for that? And so we have another version that has citations for every single line just to make sure, like, that was our fact checking run. That was like 2 months where I was like, all right, Zach, you're watching the kids. I'm just going to lose my mind.
Did you hire, so obviously, so the proposal process for those who've thinking about doing a book or have done, aren't aware, like, usually do a book proposal. If you can find a literary agent who can kind of promote it, get to the right publishers, that's one pathway. Another pathway is you find an acquisitions editor and your target, maybe a referral or just through, happenstance, and you get them to the proposal, and that's a more direct, obviously, method. When you wrote that, did someone approach you to like write a book? Did you put the proposal together and just kind of pitch it out there? Like, how did it kind of come about?
The first book came about because Randall Munroe wrote a really great book. He does the comic called XKCD, and his book just like went huge. And then the publishing industry was like, oh, well, maybe this like books written by cartoonists is a good angle. Who's the next one on the list? And so, Zach, that's Zach. So we got approached by an agent who was like, do you have ideas for books? And so then we pitched our book and ended up at Penguin for Soonish. And then we took a year or two off after Soonish, and then we pitched the same book to our editor because she's amazing and we loved working with her. So we pitched it to the same editor, and she was willing to pick up this book. And then she was a really great sport when 2 years in, when we were supposed to be done, we changed the thesis entirely and took an extra 2 years to write it. Is that your memory of the process too, Zach?
Oh, well, we didn't take an extra 2 years. I think we asked for 3 years and took 3.5.
That's so it reminds me of, so Startup Equation is a book we did. We started writing in 2013, right after we got married, literally the day after. But the manuscript itself, so our book is kind of like that landscape book, like Business Model Generation, a lot of it. So it had 140 graphics in it. A lot of it was like diagrams, models. It basically like taking 20 pages of the venture capital funding process and turning it into a 2-page infographic. Like taking that complex information to distill it, right? So it was like the book itself, like the core, the text was like, I want to say a year, 6 months to a year to write it, but the graphics took like a year and a half because we had to like figure that out. And a lot of things we kind of had, but we didn't want to create because we had a team. We had to hire a visual. I was the creative lead on it, but you don't want to create graphics just to create graphics, right? And then you throw them out, right? So it was that kind of. So when you went through that, you know, Zach, you being the illustrator and having that capability, did you have things maybe already where you kind of concepting and just kind of, you know, like high level sketching, like we want this to go along and like this, you know, kind of as you were writing, kind of like how to flow it? Did that help? Because these, I feel like it's one thing to write a textbook. Like we just wrote a text based. We have, I don't know, 15 graphics in our new book, and that was easy to generate. The book itself took about 6-7 months to do the whole manuscript, and it's in, right? Very different process. So like, how did you kind of flow that? Did you go back and forth with or did you kind of write the book and then do the visuals with it after the fact? How did you work that?
Yeah, well, so, you know, I think it depends on what you're doing. So in the case of Soonish, the illustrations were really just like for jokes. It was like just being goofy. For A City on Mars, we wanted the illustrations to mostly be explanatory. We have a few that are thrown in mostly to like break up a particularly, you know, potentially boring section, like say like the nature of international law. We have a few that are just jokes, or like aids to memory. But actually, I do believe the way, I mean, I think we had a few notions, but mostly it was like once there was something resembling a chapter done, then I would go through and suggest comics, and then Kelly would comment. But I think all the illustrations were done in like under 2 weeks.
Wow. Awesome.
Well, I'm part of, you know, it would be very different if it were a graphic novel or something that was like that really hung on the illustrations.
Yeah.
But you know, these were substantial. I mean, there's just some stuff like if you want to say like, you know, the way astronauts go to the bathroom in space, I could describe it, but it's much better to have a visual. But it's not like for someone who's a cartoonist, it doesn't take long to draw that visual. It's just you kind of get a reference image and you say, okay, it looks like this.
Yes.
So I mean, you know, whereas if we had written a graphic novel, you know, I would have expected it to take a year just to do the drawing. I think I've illustrated a graphic novel, which was I think 200 pages in it, and like going at blazing speed took 5 months, and that was like brutal. You know, I would have rather had a year. But you know, part of being like a daily cartoonist is you get pretty quick at turning in something that looks good, or at least good enough. But no, in this book there wasn't as much back and forth. It was mostly like what would help illustrate this section or break up the text a little.
So you mentioned City on Mars, which kind of leads us to the "Get Your Ass to Mars" Quaid part of this episode of this this interview. So A City on Mars was the next book, and you know you challenge, I would say, many of the we'll call it optimistic, not utopian, but optimistic claims about space colonization. I was like, so have you got any angry emails from any billionaires? Any no, just, you know, any
not the billionaires. I don't think the,
okay.
I don't think the billionaires have taken the time to read our book.
Okay.
And I don't think we expected they would. I mean, we've definitely gotten some angry emails or tweets. You know, one person compared our book to Mein Kampf. Someone else compared us to the Unabomber.
Wow.
Really interesting comparisons there. Yeah.
Wow. That's extreme, but we seem to live in a world of extreme. But you know, you've got this kind of approach to colonizing the planet. You talk about things like there's challenges, right? Having kids in space, right? It's like, or legal aspects. I did an interview in a previous episode with Sarah Pusho. So she runs Space Bridge Partners. And one of the things that they've been studying, they've been funding a mission for, is conceiving in space, right? Or like on low Earth, like if you have a baby in low Earth orbit. I mean, for those who saw the For All Mankind episode, the girl had a kid on Mars and they had to get off, but he actually needed to go back because of his body was used, you know, he was healthier on Mars, right? But her research has actually helped with Earth, like IVF. Like they've learned a lot about that. So there's a lot of advantages in it, but the research. But so talk about the the things you think are challenges we may not have talked about, like have like things that we're really not even thinking, because it's like, let's just get there and let's just have domes and let's go cruise around the rock looking for ice, like, but what do you went a lot deeper. Can you just elaborate on like your kind of journey and what you kind of started to, how'd you pose the questions to yourself, like, yeah.
Zach,
would
how about, can I babies and then you want to do closed loops?
Sure.
Okay. So I think when we started off looking at how the human body responds to space, and like what kind of medical data we have so far,
Mm-hmm.
and we were really surprised by how we have a lot of data, but very little of it is relevant to life on Mars. So we have 50 years of data from astronauts orbiting Earth, so essentially like in constant free fall, but the longest journey is a year and a half or less than a year and a half, 437 days. And so the data that we have are sort of like inconsistent. You get like a little bit of data from people who were up for a couple weeks, and then a little bit more data from a whole different group of people who were up for a month and were being exposed to totally different things. But at the end of the day, so they're in free fall, and we know that that's bad for bones and muscles and might explain why vision degrades. So the idea is that when you're in free fall, your fluids shift up towards your head and they put pressure on your eyes and they change the shape of your eyes. And so lots of astronauts come home with poorer vision than when they went up. And
Mm.
so we know that free fall is bad, and that maybe it also causes, maybe there's a whole slew of other problems that come along with it. But we don't know if the 40% gravity that you experience on Mars will be enough to make those problems go away. So one problem that we like to use as an example is that hip bones lose 1% of their density every month when people are orbiting the Earth. And the longest stay again has only been about a year and a half. So what happens if you're on Mars and maybe you're not losing 1% of your bone density in your hip, but you're losing 0.1%. But now instead of being up there for a year and a half, you're up there from the moment you're born until you're ready to have a baby. And what if your hips are just not strong enough at that point because you've been losing density, or they never got strong enough to begin with? Like, what happens when labor kicks in? Like, are your hips going to hold out? There's just all kinds of problems associated with like weak bones and weak muscles that could be a problem in lots of different ways, but particularly I'm thinking about reproduction and going into labor. And then additionally, on the International Space Station and all the stations that came before, Earth's magnetosphere protects you from radiation for the most part. And so we
Mm.
don't really have a good sense of how space radiation, which differs from the radiation we experience here on Earth, like how that increases cancer risk, for example. So now you're going to send people out to Mars and hope that their gametes aren't mutated by the high levels of radiation, or maybe you're going to keep them forever underground so that they're protected from radiation by like the regolith above. Anyway, there's just a slew of problems that we understand kind of okay from data on space stations orbiting the Earth, but Mars is just a totally different environment. It doesn't have a magnetosphere or a thick atmosphere to protect us from radiation, so you're just exposed to it. And at the end of the day, we don't know if moms or babies can survive that ordeal, and if we're going to be even able to have babies on the red planet.
So cheery,
Yeah.
happy, yeah. You have a lot of humor in the book, so but it is, dealing with you address the things quite well. So for Zach, so closed loop system. So like, how does that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think closed loop systems are a really good example of how often you talk to people who are a little more engineering, and they tend to think a solution exists, therefore the problem is solved. So you literally get people who say, well, like Mars has carbon and nitrogen and oxygen, so we can eat, drink, breathe, and have food. But it's like at some point there has to be an actual process that converts these elements into dinner. And so one of the things you basically have to have on Mars is local consumable production, right? So, for example, if you have plants producing oxygen, that means carbon dioxide is getting scrubbed, plants are getting grown, and oxygen is being created. If you don't have those things, you have to use chemical means to remove the carbon dioxide and chemical means to produce the oxygen. Notably, having high density oxygen produced the fire on Mir in the mid 90s, right? It's not ideally something you'd rather not have. And so you want to be able to produce consumables on site so you don't have to boost them over and over and over and be sure that you get a resupply to distant Mars. Problem is, we don't know a lot about this, right? So the biggest system ever created by far was Biosphere. 2 in the 90s, which had 8 people in 3 acres. So if you imagine it scales linearly, and it might not in either direction. If you're talking about having 1 million people, you need to go through 6 orders of magnitude to get to be able to supply this Martian city, and we barely have the science for 8 people. When it was run, by the end, people were starving. They'd lost a high percent of body weight. At one point, they were suffocating because of the structure leaching CO2 out of the system, meaning it was effectively leaching oxygen out of the system. There were like all sorts of basic problems. They brought in animals that didn't perform as well as expected. A bunch of plants died. They accidentally brought in lethal scorpions that they didn't want. And they generally had a hard time, even though, unlike on Mars, they had direct access to the sun and power off the Arizona grid. So you talk about having 1 million people on Mars in 20, 30 years, and no one's spending on the science to get a project like this done, even not at scale. Like, there are tiny versions of this being done around the world. There's a facility in China for 3 people. There's one in Europe that doesn't even include people. So if you were a billionaire really, really serious about making this work, you ought to buy Biosphere and refurbish it and get it running, because we don't have this closed loop ecosystem science, and we need it.
Well, it's interesting. Like, wouldn't they're building this major. Elon Musk is building this major Starship factory, kind of like the Gigafactory for batteries. And when you think in Texas, since he owns like a portion of Texas at this point, is that like create a biosphere like there to really understand that in parallel, right, as they prepare. Because I mean, right now they caught a rocket. They caught a rocket in midair. Like most people don't understand the engineer. Like that is historic. I know people are like, oh, you caught it. No, there's more. But be able to like take it, move it over, like kind of like catch it, move it over. I mean, the reusability is just insane. And but if we get to your point, like when you were writing the book, there's things that we've already surpassed, and in the speed in which that innovation happens, and they're ready to go, but they haven't done this type of work. Well, okay, like what are you gonna? You're just gonna get there and like, hey, we got there, we're good.
No doubt about it, the rockets are absolutely amazing, but there's a lot of absolutely amazing stuff that needs to happen before we settle Mars. There's a lot of research stations on the moon would be great to get the biology data that we need to know it's safe to have babies on Mars. If you could have these facilities doing closed loop ecologies in Texas, that would be amazing. But the money for these things is just largely not showing up. Musk argues that his job is to get the rockets to get us there, and then other people can solve the other problems. And that's true. He doesn't have to solve all the problems, but the other problems need to be solved before we leave. And at the moment, I'm not seeing a lot of progress happening on them because there's just not a lot of money to answer these sorts of questions.
It keeps reminding me. There's a classic movie from the '80s called Real Genius. If you ever saw it, it's one of my favorite movies with Val Kilmer. So it's about he's like one of the top geniuses, and they do laser experiments. They're like a Caltech, but he has to graduate, and it's a comedy, but it's also seriously because it's also like the '80s Cold War, the defense department. So he creates this laser. It's like it's hugely powerful. Like at the end, they finally do it, and they're in the bar. At the end, he's like, do you know what this thing can do? He's like, I don't know. The engineers figure it out. But then they realize it's basically if you have a large spinning mirror and a targeting tracking system, you can vaporize people from space. So even though you are the inventor and you just figured it, you might want to actually figure out, the rest. You just have a good sense of it. Just saying. So I want to kind of take. We've had the books and the things together. It's like you also have the respective work. So like Kelly, you are a parasitologist. Like I know nothing about this field. I've read a few things on it. Obviously, people might think of zombie apocalypse, but like, what is this work, and how does it kind of contribute to like maybe even the field of exobiology? Like as we look at for life on other planets like that.
Yeah, I don't really know. They're two totally separate parts of my life that I really enjoy, and I don't think about the overlaps between the two of them very often. Yeah. I mean, I will occasionally think about if we ever get to the point where we can bring tilapia with us to space to farm for protein, and I think that's a long way off. Like how do you make sure that they don't bring parasites with them or something? And then there's a little bit of a concern that if people live in environments that are too sterile, then that's bad for our immune systems. And that's why people get allergies or autoimmune diseases. And so sometimes I think about like what kinds of things might we want to bring with us to space so that we can have microbiomes that are sort of similar to what we have on Earth, and whether or not that will impact our health. But these all seem like problems that are way, way, way down the line. And so I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about parasites in space yet.
Okay, good. That's a good one. So, with the work here, like, what does a parasitologist do? Like, what on Earth-based stuff? So, like, what is that job? Like, people might want to know.
Sure. I mean, so there's lots of different kinds of jobs that you can find parasitologists doing. So some are medical doctors. There's not, we're pretty lucky in the United States to not encounter parasitic diseases very often, but there are medical doctors who do things like study tick-borne diseases, like, Lyme disease is common in the United States. And then when you get closer to the tropics, there can be more problems with things like malaria or hookworms, various nematodes. So there's a lot of medical doctors. There's researchers trying to understand how these parasites impact ecological communities or, fisheries and stuff like that. So looking at parasite and animal interactions. And then there's curators at museums. We do, you find us in lots of different places, and we're weird wherever you find us.
Well, weird can be very good. So,
Yeah.
on the so Zach, you tackle some really complex scientific stuff with comics. So, what's the most challenging topic you've ever had to like illustrate, like communicate? What's the craziest one?
Man, I don't know. I honestly, if it was too complicated, I probably wouldn't illustrate it.
What about your quantum computing one with Scott Aaronson?
Well, yeah, that's right. We did a comic together. So Scott Aaronson is a well-known, one of the most well-known quantum computing scientists, and for Soonish, actually, we had at one point planned to have a chapter on quantum computing, and we basically ended up feeling like, no offense to any of the various pop treatments of the topic, but it really can't possibly be done in under about 30,000 words, because like to understand it in a way that's not hand wavy just requires you to build up a number of concepts which are like at core mathematical. And so we ended up dropping it. I think we had like a 20,000 word chapter, and we were just like, this is going to end up being like, a third to a half of our book, which is not good. And Scott was one of the people we had talked to. And so, I think he was actually relieved when I read it, and I was like, we're giving up. And he was like, I think that's the right choice. But we ended up doing a comic together, which is mostly written by him, just kind of describing, so he called the mathematical part, which I won't get into, the adult conversation about quantum computing, which is just, essentially that it's more complicated than this sort of like you tried the universe in parallel, et cetera, type of stuff. And so we did do a comic together, but even then, like, in terms of complexity, essentially we were saying it's more complicated, not telling you what it is. So we've been talking for years about, could you do a book on quantum computing, and hopefully one of these days we will do it. But I think that's like a graphic novel.
I was just going to say, it sounds like it's a graphic novel. Like, it's almost like you need a protagonist to kind of like, almost like a researcher trying to figure it out. I'm not saying like a Keanu Reeves, like, movie from years ago or something, some kind of cold fusion movie, but just something that engages a reader. I think of my son is 7.5, and he loves reading, but he's engaged when he gets to read like Minecraft books or like real. I mean, his reading is excellent now, but it's really helped him. And I think like those type of graphic novels, even for people just in high school, it's a complex topic, right? It's like I deal with it. So I know that Kelly, you do a lot of academic research. So like, how do you balance that work? Are you teaching now? Are you what research you work? How do you balance that with this side of your work too?
I balance it poorly.
Honest answer. We appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, so between, trying to keep my research program running and having kids and writing and and all the other stuff. It's tough. So right now, mostly what I'm doing is I have some data sets that I collected during my PhD and my master's, and so many data sets sit on computers but never get analyzed or written up. And so I'm working on actually analyzing that stuff when I find a free moment. And then I also mentor students who do various questions related to behavior and parasites, or I do a lot of fish behavior work also. So if a student has a question that they, want help designing an experiment, they'll send me an email and we'll chat about how to do that. And I'll help them analyze their data. And yeah, so I'm staying up on research in that way, but lately writing books and doing interviews and stuff like that has occupied most of my time. But I'm never bored.
I know. I can tell you both are quite a put a power couple in the fun way. So not the yes the because it's also balance, right? Because you have the kids and you have to, they come first. So there's so many other things, right? And it's like their needs, their balance, and then we have to find our creative corners as well, to keep us sane. Yeah. So are you've written those books, taking a break. Are you considering another project? Are you looking at any kind of space exploration topics, things you're like looking to do in the next one? Is there anything you could that are circling the orbit of your creative brains right now that you're interested in?
Do you want to go, Zach?
We are both working on stuff. So my other hat is I write kids books, and so I'm kind of knee deep in that right now.
Yes.
So that's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm also doing comics, and I don't know. Kelly has other stuff. I don't know what she wants to say though.
I'm thinking about so the next book I write, I'll probably write solo because I want it to be about parasites, and Zach is not super excited about parasites, which I get. And I'm not super excited about writing kids' books. So we are taking separate paths for a little while. And then when we both wrap up these projects, we'll come together and figure out what our next mega project is going to be. But right now we're taking paths of less resistance for a little while.
Nice. No, it's good because you get the separation and can work on and then come back. That's always great. So let's, I have some kind of fun questions too, because I had this kind of imagining Voyager 3, like not the Voyager like that goes to becomes the Star Trek enemy or something, the super intelligence, but if you wanted to contribute, each wanted to contribute something for humanity, right? The new golden record, if you will. So Zach, if you had a comic panel, what would you depict to communicate the world? I love this kind of stuff because it's just what? Yeah.
I mean, so there are a lot of people. Actually, we're friends with a guy named Daniel Weitz, and Kelly does a podcast with him, who's studied this type of question a lot. And from reading his stuff, I've become fairly convinced that there's not too much you could do that would actually be meaningful, because we don't know what aliens would be like in a lot of ways. One of the things I thought was very clever on the Voyager disc is they have there's this image I think people see a lot and they don't know what it means, which looks kind of like a starburst. And what it actually is I think at that time something like 17 pulsars were known, where we knew their how they pulsed and their distance from Earth, and so each of them represents a relative distance. And so in principle, some very smart aliens could look at that and decipher it. Whereas other stuff on that is a picture of naked humans and jazz music and classical music. I'm especially skeptical of the music working nicely. Lots of animals on Earth don't understand music. Possibly, if they're an organism something like us, they could understand the naked people. But I'm actually skeptical that it you could make something really that useful. I think probably the least bad option is some sort of math, but I think even then there's reasons to doubt that. So sorry for the non-answer.
I like the interstellar GPS. That is cool. More pulsars. You can, you're giving them that map of interstellar location. That's cool. I love that.
Yeah.
As you can see, any question you ask will find a way to be downers.
Not downers.
We're consistent. Yeah.
I look at it as pragmatists, realists in the fun sense. So yeah, because you talk about, yeah, music, art, and literature. It's like, would you include something? Because it's like, you don't know what they're going to communicate and take it as hostile. Because like you could put like a parasite as in a petri dish, but they could think it's an alien. It's like it's a weapon, right? It's
Yeah.
like, well, yeah, that would not
Yeah.
be good.
I mean,
Um,
it might be interesting if I sat down with an alien and they were like, "What have your people done?" Where your people are parasitologists that you're most proud of, I think I'd say something like, "Well, we eradicated smallpox," and so, but I don't know how you convey that there was a disease that like covered us in awful pimples and we got rid of it like on, succinctly. So I would probably leave parasites off the the new Voyager disc.
okay. So if you chose, okay, then let's get away from music. This is a good one. So
Okay.
this is both kind of this is not like a Rorschach test. Like what each of you, like if you had a single sound to like represent Earth, what would it be, and why?
Flowing water.
Hmm.
One, because I love that sound, but also because I think it tells you that our planet is a planet that has flowing water, and so maybe that's useful in some way for understanding. I mean, we think that's critical for life. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I get the sound of flowing water. What about you, Zach?
No, I think that's you couldn't do too much better than that. Like maybe sounds of atmosphere or something. I mean, like obviously like Sagan and Droyan went with a little more like cerebral stuff, but we're big old skeptics over here. I mean, I also think when we send these sort of things, it's much more about us than it is about aliens. Like the odds that Voyager is ever going to encounter something that can interpret it are pretty low. So I think part of what we're doing is making art projects for ourselves. I think that's maybe a better way to think about the golden disc.
Oh, that's got to be the most negative take on the golden disc ever.
Sorry.
Well, look, you said water and air. I mean, those are optimistic things. I mean, you could have said farts. So, I mean,
That's
like
true.
the sound of a fart. Yeah, you could have said there's a lot
Yeah.
of sounds out there. Growls. Yeah, yeah. So I applaud you for the positive, here triangulation water planet. Either that's a
Mhm.
come, they're going to be great, or we have a resource planet to invade. So we don't know.
That's right. Buffet is here.
Yeah, I mean, so I know we're as we're coming to a kind of wrapping things up here. You've done so much of the looking to the soonish future. Is there anything boldly you'd like to kind of put out there? I don't even say predictions, but just kind of like what you've seen and what you're excited about, if it can kind of within our lifetimes that really kind of through your work, maybe not even in the book, but just really kind of like this, do these, each of you have like this something that's like, wow, this is, if this comes to pass or this is going to come.
I mean, I would be absolutely thrilled if fusion research was both feasible and affordable. And those are
Mm-hmm.
two pretty big hoops to jump through. But I feel like a lot of people read our book and they're like, oh, the Wienersmiths, they're like downers because they don't think we're going to be settling Mars anytime soon. But I think if we actually got to the work of answering the questions we should answer before we do that, that would be awesome. Like learning about how reproduction works in space and trying to make these closed loop ecosystems where you have to figure out recycling very efficiently. Like that could be good for Earth too. And so I don't know. I'm excited about research always, and I just think it's amazing that like in the next couple generations, we could be the people who figure out the answers to these questions, and then that will open up space for everybody, and that would be incredible.
Zach, what about you?
I think what I get excited about in terms of future stuff, there's a lot of talk about AI now, and it's gonna like take over the world and whatever crazy stuff. I get more excited about the potential for like modest increases in yearly labor productivity change. So like for me, that's the big cool hype about technology like this. If you go back to the periods we think of as especially pleasant, at least like economically, like the 40s through the early 70s, one of the big differences is productivity is growing about twice as fast. If you look at the period from like 1970 through the mid 90s, it's growing quite slowly. And then it's again been growing quite slowly since about 2005, and then especially since the financial crisis. And there's this like twinkle of hope in the data right now that either because of AI or other things that are happening right now, we could return to something like the 90s or the 40s or the 70s era. And like that's, it's life changing. It's like the difference, like if you set that back in the US by 1% per year, it's the difference between like the US and Mexico economically. So you think about what we're missing out by not having had a higher rate of growth in human productivity. So I'm extremely hyped about this boring macroeconomic stat that might be changing in the next 10 years.
This
No,
is life in the Wienersmith house.
hey, I share it. I want the 4-day work week. I think it's going to be hard for many people who just see work as their identity and wanting to work. There's the work, but then there's the other side of people who don't want to work at all. And it's a question of where does productivity and where does freedom to contribute to the society, be a product, give you the space to contribute, right?
Yeah.
You could make arguments in the United States here about healthcare. It's like, what if we, I'm not espousing any political position, but like imagine if you had healthcare paid for, universal healthcare, right? What would that do for, many people take jobs because they need the healthcare. That's what you hear a lot. What if you could have 6 months to a year to start a business and not have to worry about that for your family, or you lost your job and you don't have to, it's a very interesting. I agree with you. I just saw a video of robots folding towels in a hotel.
Yes.
Yeah,
Do my
that
laundry robot.
right. I mean, think about it. They can go 24/7, right? But it's like it's not about replacing the labor, it's a redeployment of the skills. Because I've often think of systems, design systems, things that like are repeatable. It's like it gives me the space to work on the hard stuff. So I think if we can view it through the lens of that, it'll be in a better place. So I think it kind of leads me to like, if you're giving advice to other innovators, people thinking on this, your pragmatic view, like what advice would you give people maybe trying to create, they want to make a positive impact on this, like on space and just maybe even just being writers. Just want to hear your advice to the future generation, if you will.
I think it is such an exciting time to be in space right now. Like
Yes.
there is a fair bit of money going into, certain avenues, but like things like space law, like if you try to clarify what is allowed in space and you help establish space law either internationally or for your own nation, like you could be changing the way that we do things in the heavens for hundreds of years to come. Like it's a very important time to be figuring out the rules of the road for space. So if you're interested but like math isn't your thing, going into space law could have a profound effect. And I encourage researchers to start thinking about how their research could contribute to understanding things like reproduction in space. There's just a lot of exciting questions right now to answer, and almost any skill set that you have, you can contribute in some way.
Zach, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I guess I could do the arts since Kelly's doing science. I would say, there's a tendency now, I think, for media to be kind of fragmented because everyone has to be on like 18 platforms, and that's probably going to continue to get worse. And so one thing I argue with people is if you at least get to a position where you have a little safety as an artist, you should try doing crazy things, because one of the effects of, I think, social mediaization of everything is a tendency toward mediocrity in order to satisfy an algorithm. So maybe leave a little more room to try dangerous stuff. I think there's still a market for it, if people would just do it.
I agree. I think there's two parts of that. There's the race to the middle, the mediocrity to kind of do the algorithm. But then if you do the things that are edgy or experimental, it changes the algorithm. Because I think about how YouTube or other channels have changed because of what content draws people, or like what kind of breaks through. Otherwise, we'd have 15 years of cat videos, and now, but we have a lot, some things good, some things, not. My favorite is the reaction to the reaction to the reaction. I literally watched I saw a video of a guy watching a reaction video to an original video, reacting to the like,
Yes.
what? Like, why?
Why are we doing this? Yeah.
Don't
No,
do
see,
it.
I think that's a discovery. All this time we were making scripted TV and trying really hard, and it turned out all we needed to do was have like one human doing something bad and another human making faces. That's all we want. Uh,
Yeah, that's the evolved version of that. Yeah, the cat
That's
video.
right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So,
So what's your advice?
oh, to people, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great question. Be the interviewer. I love you. I love you both. My whole thing is to get futures literate, understand that everything is not short term, that there are applications that solve problems here on Earth that just apply to just as much as doing things in space. I agree with you that this has never been a better time other than maybe the Apollo program, but that was such a narrow band of people that could do that. I think we're going to have a Cambrian explosion of a space economy. And I like to say, like, space is a place. It's also, there's an economy and an industry sector serving it. But I think the next 15 years are going to be so exciting to be in this space. So I would say, find an aspect of, because it will require not just the scientists and not, no offense, Kelly, I love you. But not just the scientists, the engineers, but the artists, the philosophers, the musicians, the people who communicate the beauty and the wonder and kind of challenge our place in the universe, even people of faith. Like, how do we position ourselves, in relationship to the universe? I think we're ready as a civilization to kind of take that next step. I do. Because if an alien civilization came over and be like, they're a backwater planet with tribal warfare, that's basically their, view of us. So if we can rise above that, I think if we can start to kind of, grow, that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is a show, is like, how do we kind of become a multiplanetary species? How do we reach for the stars? So I think, to be alive, like our children, they're going to grow up with this. It's not going to kind of loop itself into, oh, here's the big wave and now we're on Mars. Like the Apollo, like Apollo 17 was it, and there was no need to go back or battle or, with the Cold War. No, I think people, not just the economic advantage of it, but just the massive opportunities to have careers in it and just to do unique things with it. So that would be my advice. So hopefully that's good. So
Great.
well, that's a great way to kind of wrap things. I think the best thing to do is always, how do people, and I've been on your Discord, got to mention that. That's fun. That's a lot of, I am on your Discord. I am Crazy Irish. Yes, I am on your Discord.
Oh.
So, how do people obviously they can get Soonish, a City on Mars. Like, how do they stay up with your work? Both of you, you have lots of different shows. You have a lot of different things you're doing.
I have
go ahead.
I have a website, wienersmith.com, and my new podcast, Daniel and Kelly's Extraordinary Universe, comes out every Tuesday and Thursday, and that is taking most of my time right now. What about you, Zach?
I draw a comic called SMBC. It's on the usual platforms. I have a website and Instagram, etc. And in addition to our space books, I worked on a graphic novel called Open Borders, which is a position book on immigration, and a kid's book called Beowulf, which is an adaptation of Beowulf, the Old English poem.
For kids.
For kids.
Without all the gory stuff.
No spattered gore in the meat hall.
Yeah, I read it in high school. I'm like, I don't think I would give that to my son at 7.5.
No.
He probably would love it though, because it's, but no, that's great. That's great. And the Discord, which you can find on your website if you wanted to kind of join the community there. It's a fun community. So thank you both for being on the show today. It's been great. I'll have you on again. This is just a lot of fun. So thank you for the time today.
Yeah, great questions. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Offworld Podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.offworldpodcast.com. See you next time.